as many of you know, I've been writing now for somewhere in the region of, 10 years in terms of my books being published. And I've just finished the manuscript of my 10th book. Now, over the years, there have been people that have been involved in my work in different ways, and people who have contacted me throughout the years, and they have become friends of mine. Our guest today is somebody that I feel is a very good friend of mine, even though we've never actually directly spoken. He has been involved and interested in what I write about for nearly since the beginning of my writing career. And it's therefore I'm absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to have Beach Barrett join me here from the very beautiful Asheville in, I think it's North Carolina. I might be wrong, I might be criticized on that.
Yes, it is.
He's nodding, it is North Carolina, which is good. Beach is somebody that I have quoted in my work because some of his ideas and his theories on the role of the pineal gland are absolutely sensational. And I mean genuinely sensational, really, really different, well thought through. I came across one of his papers many years ago where he describes in great detail the neurology and the neurochemistry involved in the pineal gland and the role of potentially endogenous DMT, dimethyltryptamine, within the pineal gland. And he's always my first source of information. If I need a point of clarification, I'll always either go onto his website or I'll check something out, because inevitably he comes up with some phenomenal things. So we really have a fantastic show ahead, guys. So really hold on to your hats, because this one is going to blow the top off your head, believe me. Right, Beach, really, really great to chat to you at long last. You've sent me a series of fascinating questions, which I think is important that I ask these questions, because it's a wonderful structure and it really gives us the opportunity to maximize the hour we have together. So the show is getting the ideas from you. I mean, I waffle in the background, but effectively the show is here for you to get your concepts and ideas across. So I'll be reading the questions out, but I think it's important I read the questions out because they're quite precise, and I think it's quite important I do so, because normally I'm a bit more spontaneous. So question number one then. Okay. Now, first off, before you do that, very quickly, just tell us a little bit about you, just a very quick picture of who Beach Barrett is, what he does, and how he's got involved in this work.
I won't go into too much detail, but I live in North Carolina. I came here originally to work for a magazine here in the late 70s called the Mother Earth News magazine, and I was a researcher there. We did work in solar energy, alcohol production, and so forth. And at one point I got very interested in DNA. I was really wanted to learn about the whole genome process, and I went to a store in Asheville called Malaprops, one of the best bookstores in Asheville, and I was looking at the DNA information, and the lady there told me to look at another book, which was this book here, Jeremy Nabi, about DMT. Now, why would I be interested in DMT, and why would I be interested in Rick Strassman's book too? It's because back in the 70s, actually when I was living in England, I had a series of sleep paralysis events, starting in Chislehurst in London, and then went to Glastonbury, another place in Beckenham, London. And then I came back to the States and moved to Bennington, Vermont, and I had like my 7th sleep paralysis event, which I'll talk about later on. But this time I let it happen. I gave into it. I've been reading Robert Monroe's book, and I had a very profound out-of-body experience. The entrance into it, the whole sleep paralysis thing, was extremely uncomfortable and jarring, but the event itself, the out-of-body experience, was absolutely unforgettable. I was totally as real as you and I are right now, and there I was floating above my body. I didn't know how I got there, and I enjoyed the process, and I came back to my body again. But that experience remained with me for the rest of my life as one of my major events. Basically, I confirmed through what I thought was a real experience that consciousness can exist outside the confines of the body. And then I accepted that, and it changed my life. I didn't talk to anybody about it much, and I went on. And then 30 years later, I was in Asheville looking up DNA, and somehow I got sidetracked into this, and I thought to myself, this could be an explanation. Because I'm a scientist. I've always been a scientist. I've always done well in science. I was an electrical engineering student. So I began to pursue this whole process of looking into to DMT, and that, of course, led to the most likely suspect in the production of an entheogen, an hallucinogen, within the confines of our body, and that most likely suspect is the pineal gland. And so I began to look into that, and as I gathered more information, I said, what the heck, why don't I put up a web page, not to promote my ideas, but to be a resource, so that anybody else who discovered or who had an experience like this wouldn't have to go through all the steps that I did. How could list different authors? I could show different facets of research in different areas. And it just sort of took a life of its own. That was back in 2002. And I've also tried to keep the beginner's mind alive, so that for somebody who's encountering it the first time, the basics are still there. So I haven't taken anything out of it. And it's grown rather large, I'm sorry to say. It's 58 pages long now. I'm sure it's rather overwhelming for somebody, but there's an index at the very beginning, so there's about 40 areas you can look into to find out what resonates with you. And you mentioned the term out-of-body experience. It really isn't common in the vernacular, but if you look into the website devoted to out-of-body experiences, or one of the many, this one's called OBREF, Out-of-Body Research Foundation. They did a survey in Charlottesville, Virginia. They took 30,000 people at random and narrowed it down to 1,000. And of those 1,000, the only differentiation they made was between students and townspeople. They found that the students, they submitted a questionnaire. 25% of the students claimed that they had what was defined as out-of-body experience. It was with the townspeople, it was more like about 15%. And I think part of that reason was because they're talking to a younger subset. And I think all of us have had out-of-body experiences when we were very young. Just because I think the proclivity to do that and the activity of the pineal gland is a little more profound, at least in terms of this out-of-body possibilities, when we are very young, particularly in childhood, adolescence, and even in the embryo, for that matter. But the thing is that it doesn't really exist in our common vernacular. And when I give talks in Asheville or whatever, in Hendersonville, people come. They have had experiences in their life, but they've never been able to talk to anybody about it because it's just never part of the normal conversation. So the fact that it's not a common thing means that a lot of times either the events are forgotten or they're just diminished. And so that's why I built up this website, which is called Metatonin, basically the word melatonin, but with a T instead of an L, so it's metatonin because we're talking about a higher state, a very close cousin to, but a higher level of the chemical melatonin, which is, as you all know, controls our circadian rhythms and is also produced by the pineal gland. And so that's what, I'm not any kind of an expert. I'm not a, you might say, legitimate or academic scientist. I've always been a scientist. And so the contents of this website are as scientific as possible and at the same time sometimes simplified just for understanding. And some of the things are total speculation, but since nobody really knows the answer, why not put it out there? And so I guess we might as well begin with your question, Anthony.
Well, that was fascinating in the first place, just to get some kind of background as to where you've been coming from over the years. So I have a good picture there in terms of this. One of the ongoing issues that I always find is the pronunciation of pineal and pineal. I'm never quite sure exactly what the right pronunciation is. So you say pineal, I say pineal, but effectively we are talking about the same organ. So, but moving on then. So in terms historically, the pineal gland has held a prominent place in the strata of most, if not all, advanced ancient religions and philosophies. Today it is perceived as playing a very minor role, mainly of that maintaining the circadian cycles. Could you explain in modern terms, and in the light of recent research, the significance of the pineal gland?
Okay. Now we all know that pineal gland is the part of the endocrine system, and the number of endocrine glands, it's quite a large number actually. It includes the stomach and the duodenum, but the basic endocrine glands are, of course, the gonads, adrenals, thyroid, thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary, and each. And I'm not an expert on this, but if you look up what the endocrine glands, they modify the body as it develops, and also our state of consciousness. Thyroid, of course, metabolism, pituitary growth, the hypothalamus, you're talking about endorphins, we're talking about dopamines, and my feeling is that the pineal gland's major function is in modifying consciousness. And in fact, Anthony, in one of your talks, you called it the reality modulator. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the term I used.
Yeah. And when we're talking reality, really, we're talking about a perception of the real world, or what we call the real world. We're talking about consciousness. And though the pineal gland does not produce serotonin, it has many unique qualities. First of all, it's not a paired gland, whereas all the other endocrine glands are paired. It's in the center of the brain, but it is not inside what is called the blood-brain barrier, but it's right up next to it. It's in, there are many sort of areas of fluid containment in the brain, cavities where cerebral spinal fluid is stored and circulates, and this is in the third ventricle, right in the very center. The way I see the pineal gland is that it takes its basic building material, which is serotonin. Serotonin is derived from the amino acid tryptophan. And I have it. Oh, here it is. Serotonin, okay? And you can see it's got a 6-sided molecule and a 5-sided molecule. That's a hydrocarbon, mostly hydrogen and carbon and some nitrogen. And if we take serotonin, which is made from tryptophan, and we add one methyl group, methane, CH3, or the CH2, I'm not sure. I'm not a great chemist anyway. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. It's on the blue. Ooh, it's attached. Anyway, it does go. It's attached here somewhere. Oh, here it is. It's out here at the end here. It's on the end here. If we add one methyl group to it with an enzyme called methyltransferase, it becomes methyltryptamine, which is basically melatonin. And if we add another methyl group to it, using that more or less the same process, boom, we have dimethyltryptamine, okay? And the pineal gland is able to do that. In fact, in page 30 or 29 of your book, you go into a very excellent, this is Anthony's latest book right here, Opening the Doors of Perception. He goes into a very good history of the latest research in in explaining how they're beginning to verify, because it's always been a question, beginning to verify that the pineal gland can and does produce dimethyltryptamine, which is a hyperconsciousness catalyst. Now I got to get the train of thought again. Okay, so the idea is that the pineal gland has this enzyme in it. It's able to take serotonin, and it turns out that the pineal gland, as small as it is, and it's not much bigger than like a lentil seed or a small soybean, is the most serotonin-rich gland in the body. It also has, for its very small size, but according to its, a cubic centimeter of it, it has the most profuse blood flow. So it's a very active gland. Very small, but very active. And it has in it cells called pinealocytes. It has brain sand in it. And it's able to synthesize melatonin from serotonin. That is taking serotonin and adding one methane molecule to it to make it methyl serotonin. It's much more complicated name than that, but that's basically what it is. And it does that according to a signal it gets via the optic nerve. And there's a certain connection in the optic nerve called the suprachiasmatic node, where a nerve branch drops down into the ganglia and then into the pineal gland, where it gets the message that not a lot of light is diminished, we're entering nightfall, and that gives the pineal gland a signal to create melatonin. Okay? And we don't know if this is a one-way or two-way avenue between the pineal gland and the optic nerve. My feeling is it is a two-way street. And then the other process of the pineal gland is to produce this dimethyltryptamine with the 1,2-methane molecules added. Okay. What's going on here? Well, DMT is a strange chemical in the body. It's very powerful, and I say the word DMT very much relates to the word dynamite. It's a very powerful, and I'm calling it a hormone. I'm calling it a neurohormone. I believe it's not. If you look in the Wikipedia or whatever, it's not considered a hormone, but I believe it is a hormone. I think it's a legitimate thing to call it. And it's elusive and it's powerful. It's elusive in the fact that if it gets in the bloodstream, it's immediately gobbled up by a scavenger in the bloodstream called MAO, M-A-O, monoamine oxidase. And the purpose of this being in our blood is very important because you want to keep the level of dimethyltryptamine in the blood very low. It can very much interrupt normal mental processes. It is a powerful drug. So it's always scavenging the blood to make sure that it isn't present to affect our state of consciousness. However, it can be produced in a great surge and travel through another fluid in the body, the cerebral spinal fluid, and it just so happens that the pineal gland is located in the central part of the brain, this third ventricle, which I called it, between the thalamus, two lobes of the thalamus. Now, let me show you what I'm talking about here. Here's a drawing from Gray's Anatomy, I believe. I have it right here. This is if you cut your brain across this way, which is not, I think it's sagittal or whatever, this is what it looks like. Okay, and the pineal gland is right here in the center. And these two white lobes are the thalamus. The thalamus is the main switchboard of the brain, where all incoming and outcoming signals go through there, and they're switched and sent out. So it's very central to our sense of being. And it's also bathed in the same cerebral fluid as the pineal gland. And it's surmised that many times the DMT is employing this third ventricle to be able to connect with the main operating part of our brain. What they've also determined is, where does consciousness fit in the brain? Well, it seems that three of the most essential players in consciousness are the thalamus, the cerebral cortex, and the connection between the two, which is it looks like a tree with roots in the thalamus that branch up into the cortex, and it's called the claustrum. And I have a picture of that too. These are all on my web page. As a matter of fact, this is what the claustrum looks like, and you probably can't. It's not very good. My web page, I do it in color. It's like a big fan. It goes out. If any one of these three is compromised, a person loses consciousness. And so that's why they figure out these three are the main essential hardware to cradle consciousness in the brain. And so that's why when you get the DMT effect, it changes your consciousness in a way. Okay, the reason it's very powerful is because I use the analogy of a jet pilot. A jet pilot is either resting on the ground, like sleeping, in his plane, awake and moving, but he always has to have a third thing available. He has to have an ejection seat. Not used very often. In fact, it may never be used in a lifetime. But it has to be there. And in a way, this is how the pineal glands, this is one of the ways I think that it's most profoundly works, is as the ejection seat. And it basically, if you talk to anybody that's had a dose of DMT or ayahuasca, basically, DMT doesn't affect the portals of consciousness the way you see consciousness. It literally pops you out of your frame of reference. It pops you out of your body. You're still conscious. You feel like you have all your senses, but guess what? You're not in regular reality. You're someplace else. For some people, they're just floating in the room on the ceiling above them. I think in most cases, that's where people go, but other ones go through the tunnel. They see the light, the whole progression into the other side, to the pleroma, as you call it, as a Gnostic term. Some of them have UFO experiences. Some of them go to angelic realms. But this is a segue into what we call, what has been called the dark side of reality. But it's not because it's not dark. We call it dark because we can't understand it and we can't see it. But I think a lot of us feel that there is, we're part of a total reality in which a part of it is not visible to us. And we'll get into that. That's, of course, your specialty, Mr. Peake. So I got to start this thing going again. So the pineal gland, let me get my notes here. My notes. Oh, here. First time I've done this on TV like this or whatever. Let's see now. Okay. Let's see. So this can manifest in many different ways. And I think it is an experience that's very common to all of us, and it's particularly common to anybody that's in a creative activity, either artist, dancer, physical activity, writers. And usually when it manifests as a profound epiphany. In fact, in Greek it's called the epiphysis. And it sort of an opening into, we could call it the Akashic record. There's the amount of information that's in the universe that is not normally accessible to us, but which we are surrounded by. And what I've done is I have, in fact, this is supposed to be Anthony's second question. is in the next stage in my in the web page. I discuss what are some of the various ways, what are some of the categories in which we can sort of create this spectrum of understanding how this DMT manifests via our pineal gland. And I've broken it into 5 different classifications. But if you go on to OBREF, the out-of-body webpage, they broke it into 12. So you can do a number of things. But I basically break it into pineal gland, or I call it a metatonin event, because I'm calling melatonin. I'm trying to separate DMT as a drug you can buy on the street. It can be manufactured synthetically. You can get from different kinds of cactus. And actually, it's all throughout the natural world. It's exogenous. It's from outside the body, as opposed to endogenous DMT, which is produced by the pineal gland and other organs in your body, to your lungs and your retina and your stomach as well. But again, as I said, when it's produced in your body, it's usually destroyed by the scavenger, monoamine oxidase. And what I'm talking about here are the different categories that it can manifest in human experience. The first one is intentional. I have a list here of about the different methods. I'm wearing my glasses, folks. The first group are basically nirvana, sought by a number of religions. Vision quest, Native American vision quest. Dream time. Dream time is a phenomenon found among the Aboriginals. And if you read about it, it's phenomenal. They go into that state where they have this, they're on one leg and they have, I don't know how they stand the way, but I'm sure you've seen pictures of it. It's a way that they navigate an almost featureless environment. I've been in the outback, and you can go for hundreds of miles and just scrub the brown dirt. And you're driving along in a bus for an hour, and all of a sudden you see an Aboriginal group walking along. They have a couple of blacks, and they're walking like, oh, no big deal. But they're in the middle of nowhere. You know, you've got trees, there's no water, there's nothing. But they have a way of communicating. There is water there. And they go into a state where they tap into what they call the dreamtime ancestors. And they can see right where to go. And when they wake up in the morning, they have no agenda, but they know they're going to be cared for. They have absolute faith in their connection with this other reality and the end of the dream time. And that's how at least the classic Aborigines existed. Sufi enlightenment, Taoist entrance into the Crystal Palace, creative ecstasy. Lala May wrote about this, but artists will tell you, if you know about the process, it's usually when you're working in a new concept in art, say you're a painter, you kind of hit a ceiling and you keep on pushing yourself and you get frustrated and you keep on trying. And all of a sudden, it's like a quantum jump. You'll get this burst of creative ecstasy, it's called. I thought to myself when I was a photographer. And on that day, you can do nothing wrong. Everything just flows. Extreme sports. What else is here? Remote viewing. These are all methods where people are intentionally trying to activate this out-of-body phenomena, although they haven't got a name for it, which in most cases I think is the pineal gland. Okay, then there's the unintentional events that can take place where it's created where it wasn't even expected. For example, rebirthing. There's a holotropic breathing. This is which we may consider intentional too, but one of the side effects of it is you have an out-of-body experience. A lot of times in a collective group, a gathering, a ceremonial dance, people will be transcended. They'll go into a rapture. A lot of times, just an extremely intense emotional pressure will trigger this. And for example, if you read the autobiography of Bucky Fuller, there was a period in his life when he had been turned down so many times, he had so many great ideas, but he was really at the bottom of his bucket, and he was just about to give up. And then all of a sudden, he felt this huge rush, and he just saw everything from a great perspective, and he saw his life in a whole much grander framework, and it turned him around. And this has happened to many people, and many writers have written about it, and I covered it on my webpage. Another thing, too, is out-of-body consciousness as an escape from extreme pain, torture, or you could talk to people that have been in life-threatening battles. All of a sudden, they knew what to do. They saw the whole thing from above. A lot of soldiers report this. An out-of-body experience through sexual experience, through how sexuality can, sexual activity can lead to that as well too, and also G-lock, which is gravity-induced loss of consciousness, creates out-of-body events. These are people that go in those big spinning chambers that are experiencing high Gs, and when they come out of it, sometimes they have these as well. So that's the second category. The third category, and I think this is the most important category because it's the most carefully monitored event, is near-death experiences. I have a lot of fascinating books, including even Alexander's book, but probably the most respected scholar on this is Pim van Lauwen. He's a Dutch cardiologist. He's been wrote some incredible books about the near-death experience. And the thing is, these people are relying on the operating table, and of course they're unconscious. And yet, a certain number of people find themselves floating above the operating table, listening to conversations, seeing tools being used on them they've never even thought of. Sometimes they'll leave the hospital room and won't let anyone out and look around the hospital and saw things. And then when they come back, the doctor will say to them, how was your experience when you were being operated on? And, people say, well, I heard what you were saying. I heard that joke you made about my kidney, or you decided to use my, or you didn't like my right aorta. What's wrong with you? But I mean, what I'm saying is, people have actually witnessed actual events in surgery. And on top of that, this is being recorded on video, real time. So they can verify that what the things these people saw really did suffice. There's no doubt about it. And of course, these people talk about the sensations they get. Now, some of them don't stay in the operating room. Some of them go through this process of traveling the tunnel. Okay, so then we have an actual scientific or validation and verification process. So when Rick Strassman did his study on DMT, which was also very scientifically done, well, guess what? The people that took DMT had almost identical experience to those who were having a near-death experience. So here's a connection. It's a connection between DMT and leaving the body and possibly the beginning part of dying, what dying is like, what the dying process is like. Because when you review, when you in the information, in the surveys that have been done with people having near-death experiences, let's say by Moody, for example, 100% of them say, I didn't want to come back. 100% say that. And that's different because they have to come back and they haven't finished their job. But the next significant thing that they all say is they have a life review. a panoramic life review, which means they go through every single emotional event in their life, but it's panoramic. This means they also experience the emotions of those they've affected. Things you thought you did for people that were a favor, it might have been good about nothing. Things that you've done when you were angry or you were hard on somebody, maybe it turned out right. But you're able to see a holistic view, not just what you felt yourself, but your impact as well. And what's interesting, I always say to somebody, you think you're being watched? Well, you are. You're being watched by your future self. It's kind of cool. Anyway, so that's the near-death experience, which is another phenomenon of out-of-body. The next thing we talk about is lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is another phenomenon when you're having you're in the REM sleep, and you come awake. You're dreaming, and you say, "Hey, I'm here." Now, when you're in a dream, it's a very, very delicate state, because you'll notice in your dream state that the other beings in the being, they kind of recognize that you're there. They kind of woke up a little bit. And they'll sort of look at you and say, "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be conscious in a dream." But a lot of times when it happens in a lucid dream, you'll just kind of freak out. Because, oh my God, I'm awake, and boom, you wake up again. Because in a lucid dreaming state, it's very powerful. You're in the thought realm. Any thought you have has a tremendous amount of power. And if you think a thought, it becomes real. And since you're not used to that, you have to be very careful. Now, if you've meditated a lot, and you can pull yourself back and let the dream unfold, it will last a lot longer. But if you get excited and you want to change something, or you act assertively, it will. But if you're quiet and you let the environment speak to you, and you have a way of keeping yourself from not getting excited, it is an exciting thing. You can actually modulate your dream. There are certain societies, certain religions, Bowen religion, for example, they do dream yoga. Certain African societies that they Ekankar, for example, these philosophies and religions, they actually find the lucid state extremely important, and use it as a guidance to your life. And I think most of us, the problem with lucid dreams is that it's from the subconscious realm, and when you wake up, if you don't write it down right away, your memory, it seems to be sucked back into the unconscious. You've got to really nail it down fast. And I think a lot of us have had lucid dreams and said, "Well, that was great." But if you don't write it down, it's gone. It just disappears. Because it really is from the other realm. It's not that it's verboten or anything, but it's something you have to work at if you want to keep that information. So they're near-death experiences. And then the fifth group, and the fifth group that of this phenomenon of endogenous DMT, which I call metatonin, is mental illness. And imbalances that create a disturbed mental state, particularly schizophrenia. As most people know, schizophrenia usually manifests later on in life in your teens. And in fact, we have a friend that we actually witnessed it happening to him. And it's like entering a hallucinogenic state when you don't know what's happening, and you can't turn it off. It wasn't necessarily hallucinogenic, but he became extremely sensitive to what people passing by, to hear their thoughts. Might be interesting for a while, but when you can't turn it off, you don't know where it comes from, it changes your whole outlook on life, and eventually structural changes in your brain and so forth. And I think one theory is that this monoamine oxidase, this MAO, it's in your blood, they're trying to keep the DMT level, the default level, the basal level of DMT level low, malfunctions, and maybe it's allowed to rise a little bit. And so you start getting these extrasensory kind of things happening to you, which may seem a gift at one point, but when you can't turn it off, it becomes a burden. And those are the 5 categories that I break the endogenous DMT.
As a question on that, the monoamine oxidase, why do you think we've evolved it? Because clearly it is something that's evolved in the brain to counteract, or evolved in the body, to counteract the effects of DMT. Why do you think that is? Have you any ideas as to why you might think that this may have taken place, or why we've evolved in such way that we generate endogenous DMT, metatonin as you call it, which I think is a wonderful term, by the way. I use it myself. I always should say at the end, trademark Beach Barrett, and I do try to do that whenever I use the term, because I think it's such a wonderful concept, meta as in above, as in metaphysics, so it's metatonin and melatonin. But what do you think, it's slightly off questions, but I'm just intrigued as to, from your point of view, why do you think we've evolved MAO, and what we know what its function is, but why do you think it's evolved? It's as if it seems to be stopping us being able to move forward within the greater universe, within the pleroma, maybe.
Good question. Well, people that do have this gift, a lot of times they become shamans or medicine people or spiritual guides, but they're not terribly practical people usually. They don't do it too much for the practical world. I think probably it's a survival instinct. Although certain writers, I forgot his name, somewhere, believe that at earlier stages we did live in a more connected state. And also
Julian Jaynes, Beach, I guess that was Julian Jaynes, yeah?
No, it's someone else. I don't have it. And also, the whole bilateral, bicameral right-brain connection, which is what your book's all about in many ways. There may have been a shift in that. In fact, there's a book out right now that talks about how 200,000 years ago, when we were on a different diet, we were taking more flavonoids, we were eating fruits instead of meat, we weren't eating grains, and that diet actually encouraged our left brain to function on a much stronger, a much higher function than when we switched to the savanna and grains, eating meat, and we turned more into our right brain. To our left brain, and became much more logical and physical and material or whatever, which is really fascinating. So, yes, you're right. I'm sure it's a matter of evolution, and it is a delicate balance. Right? It's amazing how many balances there are in the body to keep us at the level that we're at. That's my take on it. It's the survival mechanism, I'd say. Maybe there are a lot of human beings that were born with a low level of monoamine oxidase, and the default level of DMT was very high, but they didn't survive, as opposed to those who were, less sensitive.
That makes sense. That does. So going back then, one of the most intriguing of your writings, and something I've put in my own books, again acknowledging the source, is the role of DMT in the development of the embryo, and in terms of your model of how this takes place, which I think is absolutely amazing. Would you like to share with us the model that you put forward there in terms of the 49th day of gestation, etc.?
Yeah, because you mentioned a lot about, in your talks about when the brain is developing, when you're adding in models, when the brain is growing in size and the molecular weight is larger and larger, at what point does consciousness appear? Well, I don't think it's a quantum thing like that. I think it's a very gradual thing. If you look at the human embryo, 49th day, the pineal gland appears, and in a lot of sacred texts, the Bardo and so forth, That is when the being first enters the body. Of course, when the being first enters the body in 49th day, there's no portals. There's no eyes, there's no ears, there's no skin. But as the embryo develops, senses do awaken. And there's a really good novel out now. It's by Italo Calvino, and it's called The Complete Cosmiconics. It's a novel, but it's so fascinating. He starts out with this being that just has two portals. It has a mouth and an anus. But he explains how this being begins to evolve. First of all, it begins to become aware that there is an other. It's just in itself at first. And then it begins to detect that there are more than others. And then it begins to, and then as its portals open, vision opens a little bit. I think the next thing is touch. It begins to feel that it has an outside. And then vision appears. And I think this is the same thing with the embryo, that though there's consciousness in it, consciousness is defined by its portals. As the portals develop, so does consciousness. And finally, near the end of gestation, you have your portals, but they're not too functional because you really can't see anything. You really can't even feel anything. You're basically in an isolation chamber. And then, you come out of the womb, all of a sudden you realize you're a separate being. You might have felt like you were a separate being in the embryo, but it was kind of part because you were just banging against the inside of the uterus. All of a sudden you're cold, you're dry, there's sounds, there's light, there's commotion, and you're trying to make sense out of it. But you have become a separate being. And so I think consciousness evolves in that way. It's a slow process, and it even continues after you're born. And actually, it becomes dampened. Well, first of all, you learn to use your portals, and then you develop the buffers as you mature. So it's a continuing process. But here's the thing, and what we're trying to kind of deal with this whole consciousness issue is that, recent theoretical physics has pretty much come out with the idea that consciousness is a primal form of energy. And in understanding this whole thing, you've got to sort of look at the bigger picture. What is this other side? Okay. So many writers, Michael Talbot, Lynn Taggart, so forth, Carl Preben, all these people are mentioning. It looks like this other thing, this other side of reality that we're sort of attached to, but we can't access, is a holographic reality. A holographic. Oh, I've seen a hologram. I know what holographic means. Holographic reality is a really strange phenomenon because where we exist, all forms of energy are radiated. Candle turns out, and as you move away from the candle, it gets dimmer. The flashlight, it gets dimmer. Everything, any wave that comes at you in a radiative reality is slightly curved. Now, if that source of light is 1,000 miles away, it's almost flat, but nonetheless, if you go further away from that light, it's going to get dimmer. We're in a diminishing reality where energy diminishes with space, with distance. The other reality is not radiating. It's scalar. Everything is parallel. Waves are parallel. So if you're in a scalar reality, let's say a wall is a source of an energy wave. As you move away from it, it doesn't get any weaker. It stays the same. Also, that energy doesn't peel away. For example, here are my prompts. Other prompt. You take a flashlight and you shine it off. Even if you've got a lens and everything, the wave is fine. As you get further away, it's going to get dimmer and dimmer. You get a laser, and there's a laser here. Right here. Now this laser has a lot of points on it, but the very center one, right there, see the one in the center of my hand? That's the main beam. If you were in a vacuum, this beam would stay that same diameter, the same width for 50 miles. You still see it 50 miles away. It's a parallel wave. In this reality, things aren't focused the way we are focused. But I have a feeling that in this other reality, this pleroma, for example, whereas in our reality, gravity is the coagulating force, in that reality, consciousness is. And that we're in it as well. We're both occupying the same space. And where we are in that space, if you can actually see the consciousness field, there's like a little dip in it. The same way that gravity has little dips in it where there are objects. And we have to be able to interpolate that reality into our physical realm. So far, nobody knows how to even detect it. So I've been trying to figure out, where is this connection? How do we connect with this undefinable reality that exists? For example, in this state where everything's parallel, there's no heat. It's zero. There's no heat. And information is dispersed. It's like a plasma. It's like a plasma matrix. It's almost impossible for us to even conceive of what it means to be in a scalar reality. And yet, it's where all of the information is stored. It's where we have access to it. And I think possibly the most likely candidate, again, is the pineal gland. And how does this operate? The pineal gland has 4 major properties that no other gland has. First of all, it has a connection with the optic nerve. That way we can get information from it. It's not a very direct route, not very strong, but still it's the same route that works for the production of melatonin. Second of all, we have pinealocytes. These are a form of a photoreceptor. We're not sure what they're receptive to, but it could be light. The third thing is we have a material called brain sand. Now, it's called brain sand because no one knows what it is. Right? It's some sand in the pineal gland. It's also in the cerebellum. Why would the body go to the effort of making a sand? Well, it really isn't sand. It's quartz. It's calcite. But it isn't just quartz. It's also magnetite and also apatite. 3 different kinds of crystalline structures. And they're in a mixture. And if you go to the bottom of my webpage, I actually show pictures of the 3 different crystals. And they form rhomboidal type crystal structures. But this is, of course, at a microscopic level. Well, this one lady wrote a research paper. It was kind of interesting, and she touched on some subjects. One of the things she noticed was that these crystals are birefringent, which means that most crystal subjects, or glass, for example, when light goes in at an angle and it goes into the glass, it gets bent, refractive index. Well, these crystals have a dual refractive index. They can take a light and split it into 2. And what I'm thinking is, once you take light as a single beam. When it comes out, it's a plane now. It's two. What goes in as a single beam becomes planar. It becomes a flat plane. It's 2 waves coming out. It goes in as 1 wave and comes out as 2. 1 wave is a point. 2 waves creates a plane. So we're taking a point source and turning it into a planar source. This is a little crazy, but I'm thinking what's happened is somehow this combination of crystalline materials can take planar reality, scalar reality, holographic reality, and just take a slight amount of it and turn it into a physical disturbance. Not a big physical disturbance, but on a molecular level, a very small disturbance. Okay, so now we have this antenna, this antenna or interpolator of scalar reality, turning it into a point source reality, our reality. Not very bright. And then we have these pinealocytes that can pick up light. But Here's a problem. The crystal is turning it into a physical disturbance, but not turning it into light. There's a period sites where you receive light, but there's no light there. Here's the fourth element, DMT. Now, methamphetamine, along with a lot of hallucinogens, is piezo-luminescent. That means when you disturb it, it gives off light. Now, this can happen at a very small level. We're talking single photons. But my feeling is that we're able to interpolate this scalar reality into a disturbance, and the pineal and the DMT turns it into a photonic message that the pinealocytes can pick up and transfer to the brain. And this is a pretty good scenario. And I can't think of any other. I can't find any other organ in the body that has all these properties, although the cerebellum does. And it's interesting, the cerebellum has brain sand too, because the pineal connection to the optic nerve provides for vision. But when you have an out-of-body experience, it's more than just visual. It's mainly visual, but you feel you're there too. And the cerebellum has to do with body movement, I believe. I'm not sure. I forget what it was. Something has to do with body coordination or whatever. And so I think maybe something like that happens in the cerebellum. I don't know. Maybe the same thing happens there, so that it's more than just a visual experience. I don't know. So this is the segue. Tony? Did you want to say something, Tony?
No, I was just about to say that is absolutely amazing. It's taking forward a lot. In the final chapter of my book, The Infinite Minefield, I discuss piezoelectricity. I discuss pineal sand and the role of pineal sand, and the way it could become some kind of transducer or something like that. Now, your scalar model there is absolutely fascinating. And I'm not sure whether the listeners will necessarily get the power of what you've just said, because this is taking, isn't it, in many ways, the concept of orchestrated objective reduction and the idea of Stuart Hammerhoff and Roger Penrose. And what you're doing is you're actually giving it a far more accurate model than the ideas of reality being generated by the microtubules, because what you've done is you've taken it and placed it within the pineal gland. And with the 5 categories you put forward there, I think you've got something really, really incredible. And how are you getting this out there? Because this is as always is with your work. You're an independent scholar, an independent thinker who's coming up with the most amazing ideas. Have you discussed these with Rick Strassman and other people? Because they are incredible.
I'll tell you, I don't advertise because I don't even tell any of my friends I'm doing this, tell you the truth, because it's too far for most of my friends. And if I do, they'll look at it and say, oh my gosh, they don't have anything to say about it. Really, I like people just to find it, because if you have a question in your mind and it's been egging you and you're looking for an answer, and you go and you search on the internet, all you got to do is look up pineal gland research. I'm right there at the top. But I mean, if you're looking for it and you find it, it's much more of a reward. I've had 180,000 hits, so I'm not really, in the backwaters. But
have you, funnily enough, just coming in here, have you come across the work of Professor Istvan Bokken? He is a Facebook friend of mine, and he's a researcher into piezoelectricity, and he's a researcher into biophotons. I think facilitating communication between you and Istvan might be really, really powerful. It might be, and you'll get this, the link in between David Bone and Roger, and who's the guy that, his name has escaped me now, that Bohm worked with. You mentioned him earlier on. He died comparatively recently. Name begins with a P. No, name has escaped me, unfortunately. I'm not as good as I used to be in terms of my ability to recall. It's terrible, isn't it, getting older? Right, we're getting towards the end now, and I think that we've only just scratched upon the surface. We never got into the other questions, but we didn't need to, because you just put the ideas across, and that was the whole point of why I wanted you on the program, because you've been a massive influence on me and my own writing, because you've managed to point me in certain directions I wasn't thinking about. Now, how can the listeners contact you and everything else? If you can again reiterate your website and your details and any other ways they can contact you, because what you're talking about here is quite revolutionary and very, very logical. So if you can let everybody know how they can contact you, because I think it's important, and anything I can help to get your ideas out there, I'm more than happy to do so, because I'm a huge admirer of your work, and you know that. So if you can let everybody know how they can contact you, and let's see if we can really get this ball rolling.
Well, the easiest thing to do is just to go on Google and pineal gland research, and I'm usually the top one there. But it's called melatonin. Melatonin is just melatonin with a T, and melatoninresearch.org. Basically, that's all there is to it. Very simple.
Okay, well, Beach, thank you so much. I mean, I can listen to you forever. You know, and it's when somebody's talking, these little lights are going on, and you're going, yep.
Okay.
And I don't know if you have read my last chapter of the book, The Infinite Minefield, but if you haven't, go back and have a read of it, because I think that I'm coming in one direction, you're coming in another direction, and there's great synergy here as to how we might be able to go forward, because I'd never thought about the scalar idea before. And I think that's absolutely superb. Really, really sort of resonates with my own understanding of how the brain functions, how the brain works, and everything else as well. So as always, you've got something really profoundly important here, Beach. Really, really is. Which incentivizes me even more to get over to Asheville to spend a couple of days with you talking through these ideas, because I think between the two of us we could come up with something fairly exceptional. Right, okay, well, thank you very much for spending an hour with us. We'll get you back onto the show, because I think it's important. With everybody else, we've only just scratched the surface. And Deja and I have discussed this many times, that what we need to do is to get a kind of an ultra conference where we get all the thinkers together to create an egregore of ideas, you know, and we've had some great people on this show, and it's like a huge Venn diagram. It's what's in the middle, and it's the overlapping areas in the middle that are really going to change the paradigm. And you're one of the guys that are doing the paradigm changing as far as I'm concerned. So thank you very much for joining us. And again, as always, my thanks to Dia Nunez there in the background in Denver, Colorado, who without Dia's work, this would not happen and would not work. So thank you again, and thanks for joining us again in the latest edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Okay. Great. Thank you.